morning and welcome to Breakfast at Dawn. I'm Naveen Naqvi. Okay, let's get right into it. The tussle between the Chief Justice and Musharraf continues. The latter is all over the papers today with headlines such as Musharraf snubs the Supreme Court, well, except the news, which says that there's a Malik Qayyum has dumped Musharraf. Well, it may be true that retired General Musharraf has been isolated as his case comes up in the Supreme Court, but gloaters, beware. What are the consequences of his losing the case? Does everything fall apart like a house of cards with the NRO? That's what a lot of our comments are saying that you're writing into us. So is the Chief Justice taking on the former president or the present one? Or is it a case of getting two birds with one stone? Well, retired Justice Shaikh Usmani is a former Chief Justice of the Sindh High Court. He is with us now, live in our Karachi studio. Good morning and welcome to Breakfast at Dawn.
First of all, I wasn't Chief Justice, I was just a judge, right? The judge was
okay.
High Court, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Justice Usmani, what do you think? Do you think that what I'm saying is true, that what my followers are saying is true, that this is a little bit of a case of a personal vendetta against the former ruler?
I wouldn't say it was a vendetta, or it is a vendetta. What I would say is that it wasn't necessary to issue that notice to Musharraf, General Musharraf, because the Chief Justice was only examining the legal aspects of the proclamation of emergency on 3rd November, and for that there was no need for the person who actually introduced the emergency to come and defend it. It's been done. It's history which would judge that. All that the Supreme Court do was to decide whether it was done correctly or not correctly. So from that point of view, I don't think it's a personal vendetta, but there was no need to send a notice to Musharraf. Perhaps the notice was sent out of considerations of justice, because perhaps the Chief Justice thought that it may be a good idea to hear the person who actually introduced the emergency. And I heard your comments about the general snubbing the Supreme Court. I wouldn't call it snubbing either.
Okay.
Because it was just a notice. And when a notice is issued by the court, it is up to the individual to whom the notice is issued to appear or not to appear. So it is not snubbing if he doesn't appear.
Okay.
And in fact, if I'd been his lawyer at this juncture, I would advise him not to appear, because it would just open Pandora's box. It would create problems. It would bring so many things else in view, and you know that in our country everybody worships the rising sun, and when the person falls, nobody's there to support him. So if he had come into the court, a lot of people would have gone for him, even though they were his supporters earlier on, the way our nation is made, you know. So I think he was wise not to appear before the Supreme Court.
Okay. Just to clarify, it wasn't my comment. It's been all over the papers and also online on most websites. And Musharraf snubs the Supreme Court. So just to make that clear.
I don't think that's a correct statement.
Okay. All right. Now, I have a comment here from one of our followers. Mr. Cool is his Twitter ID, and he says, NRO is the one thing we all want to see go. It was a big mistake, and it'll help get rid of those who shouldn't be around at all. So can you comment on that, please? And how exactly, can you explain to us how exactly does the NRO get affected by this case?
Well, yes, NRO was a disgraceful piece of legislation. There's no doubt about that. And the circumstances in which it was brought about, I think, has already been explained by Musharraf in one of his statements, I think, from London, where he said that he felt that it was necessary to do that, and it was obviously part of a deal, as we all know. But what happened subsequently, it was being heard, and then because to prevent something happening, Musharraf introduced his 3rd November emergency. But what one has to see is that the NRO has not been finally decided. In the sense, the last Supreme Court that we had, headed by Justice Doga, that Supreme Court did not decide that finally. So that the petition against the NRO is still there in the court, and it is always up to the Supreme Court to take it up and decide it finally. And whether they would do that or not, now that is there are a lot of political elements involved in this, because if he does take it up, and if the Supreme Court does decide that it was not in accordance with the Constitution, or it was to be struck down, then in that case there'll be a lot of problems, because we have the beneficiaries of the NRO now in power.
Indeed.
Yes, and they will all be affected. The top man would not be. because he's the president. So he has the immunity, but the others would be,
Right.
and there'd be problems.
Okay, let me just read out a couple of comments as well. We have Shobs is his Twitter ID. He says, "What you sow is what you reap. He will get his just deserts. If the powers that be have their way, I doubt that anything will happen." So a little bit of back and forth there. And then we have Musa Salim, who says, "Only Musharraf should not be prosecuted. The ones who supported him in these acts are equally responsible and should also be brought to justice." There's a lot of that kind of sentiment as well, about how there's, you know, as we just discussed, targeting that's going on. But obviously, one doesn't want to think that that would be the case about the judiciary, especially after the long fight.
Well, I personally feel that judiciary has taken more than it can chew, because going into all this, which wasn't necessary, because the petition before the Supreme Court was only in respect of the confirmation of 2 judges. So they didn't have to really go through all this. Now the situation before the Supreme Court is that if they hold that the emergency was illegal and all the subsequent actions of Musharraf were illegal, in that event, what will happen to all the laws passed, all the decisions made and all that? And the Supreme Court cannot hold the emergency illegal and yet hold all the actions legal. It will be contradiction in terms. So that has to be done by the Assembly to validate or to indemnify everybody. Now, if the track record of our Assembly is such that they're really interested in nothing else but to have a good time and to increase their perks in the Assembly, they're not really doing any legislation. So as a result, there'll be chaos. The other aspect is about the judges. Now, if the Supreme Court holds that the actions were illegal and all the oaths taken by the judges were not correct, then the judges are gone, all the PCO judges are gone. But then the question arises that if, in principle, it is held that to take oath under the PCO is illegal, then what happens to the judges who took oath under other PCOs? So it's a Pandora's box that you're opening. And then let's see, if the action is held as illegal, then all those who abetted the illegality, the generals, the corps commanders, and all these other people, they have to be brought in before the court.
Right.
Now, there's going to be a lot of problems. So that's why I said the Supreme Court has taken more than it can chew.
Right. Which is why Malik Qayyum would be saying that the Chief Justice is treading dangerous waters here by getting into this.
Indeed. You see, because one has to understand that whatever we may say, we may have a democracy or not, but the army stays in power, because that's the only organized, disciplined organization in this country. The rest is all chaos.
Right.
So the army, if you step on the toes of the army, they will react. And if they react, then all this newfound freedom and everything will go.
But
so
don't you think it might be a good idea for the army to react in that way, for them to be a little bit on their toes?
Well, I don't know, you see, because we've got this democracy and this freedom of judiciary and all that after a great deal of effort and turmoil. And I think if we make mistakes, one has to tread the path a little carefully. And if you do not, there can be problems. So I think, in my view, the Supreme Court should just confine itself to looking at the judges and the PCO's judges if they want to, and not go into the details, because that is certainly going to create problems.
Okay.
This should be left to the Parliament.
Right.
The Parliament should do this. If the Parliament does it, then there's going to be no problem. But unfortunately, the Parliament is ineffective.
The Parliament is ineffective. Okay. But, you know, some of the comments that I got were to the effect that, well, not some, I'll say very few actually, were that, you know, someone has to make an example of this kind of thing. You know, I mean, we've been around for over 60 years now, and there have been all of these different military dictatorships. And the judiciary has often been, well, complicit in military takeovers. So now an example will be set to military dictators of the future, perhaps, let's say. What do you think about that?
Well, you see, the military doesn't have any inhibitions. I mean, if the military wants to take over, there's nobody who can stop the military from taking over. So they have, as I said, they're the only organized institution in the country, and discipline. So if they want to take over, regardless of all your Supreme Court or all your Parliament, they just take over. What Musharraf did, he staged a coup against himself, virtually. So, I mean, there's no restraints on the army at all. So I think the army is presently confining itself to its own task, which is a very good thing. And I think one should not disturb the waters unnecessarily.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being part of the program here and joining us on Breakfast at Dawn, Justice Shaikh Osmani. We're going to take a very quick break now, but we'll be right back. Stay with us here on Breakfast at Dawn.